Welcome everybody that's joining the session right now. Please, we're going to get going in a couple of minutes as people join in. Please do use the chat to introduce yourselves, where you're from, be great. For those of you just joining now, we're just going to get going in a minute or two, but welcome. Really great to have you here. Please do use the chat to introduce yourselves and where you're joining us from this morning. Would be great. Okay, let's get started. Morning, everybody. If you were at the opening keynote last night, then welcome back. If not, then welcome to Friends for Life UK 2020 via Zoom. Great to have you with us. My name's Chris. I'm just going to introduce this session and then hand over to our main speaker this morning, John Pemberton. So we're talking about dynamic glucose management with CGM this morning. I hope that that's the session that you're expecting. In general, for these sessions, it'd be great if you could. I'd seen lots of people with their Zoom name in the format that we asked in the email. That'd be great. I think that if you haven't managed to do that yet, it's quite hard to do in webinar, but maybe before the next one you could make that change. Would be great. Please do use the Q&A and the chat. Use the chat to introduce yourselves, to chat amongst each other as the session is going on, to leave comments. Please be respectful if you do that, and then please use the Q&A box for your questions to John. If you type them as you think of them rather than save them up for the end, I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I'll put your questions to John at the end of the session. It's great to have John Pemberton back with us at Friends for Life UK. He's we working really hard when he's here, doing lots of sessions, not just for us but for teens and younger children as well. Over the last couple of years, when we get feedback on speakers, what people love at Friends for Life UK is people who speak from their own experience, as John definitely does, and people who bring that experience to bear in terms of practical help for us and our families. John, who is type 1 himself, I'm sure we'll share a little bit about that, works at Birmingham Children's Hospital, where he runs a number of clinics, including a specific sports clinic, as well as helping people at early stages of diagnosis and in transitions to new technology. One of the things he's particularly passionate about at the moment is use of CGM, which is where we're headed today. John is also a really good cricketer in his own right, and the first time that my kids heard John speak, one of them rushed off to his diabetes website to check out the Google Docs, and the other one checked him out on Play Cricket to see what his batting average was. So John, thanks ever so much for joining us this morning. It's great to have you, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about glucose management.
Perfect. Welcome everybody. I'll share my screen in a second. First of all, thank you for spending the next 40-45 minutes with us. Like I said, we're going to be going through continuous glucose management. and really some of the tips and tricks and things that you can do. So I'm just going to share my screen now, hopefully, and we'll get the right thing up. View full screen mode. Perfect. Okay, so you'll see here there's a QR code. The reason why I've put that here, if you now on your screen get your iPhone or your QR code reader and put it over that, that will take you to a Google Drive where it's got this presentation, everything that I'm going to go through, and everything that I'm going to go through in future presentations as well. So don't worry too much about taking notes. If you get that QR code, or at least take a screenshot of your screen now, and you'll be able to get that afterwards. So I don't want you panicking thinking that you wouldn't be able to get access to it. Okay, so this session's a bit weird for me because normally I would have some feedback and I would see some nods in the audience and some smiles, hopefully. So I'm just going to pretend that that's all happening in the background and carry on. But please submit your questions. Anything that you don't understand, please fire in the Q&A and Chris will hop in and just sort of say, look, I don't think they're really getting that, so I can maybe explain it another way. But I'll just crack on. I'll put my email address there. If you're something burning you really want to know and you drop me an email, I will try and answer you, but I can't promise that'll be the case because I've got 2 young kids who you might get to meet at 5 to 10 and they demand my time. So the idea of this session is talking about how to use the glucose values and trend arrows with things that you do on a daily basis to maximize time in range. And by time in range, I mean glucose levels between 3.9 and 10, or if you're not from the UK and use milligrams per deciliter, between 70 and 180. And that's what this is all about. But before we get started, it's something before we go on this session is I want you to think about. So the first thing is I've got type 1 diabetes and everyone watching this either has type 1 or has a loved one with type 1 diabetes. So that's the fact. But the story you tell yourself about that can vary in different ways and from day to day. So the survive story is every day is like, it's so oppressive. It's the daily battle of checking the glucose level. Got to give the insulin 15 minutes before. Got to deal with lows. Got to deal with highs. No 2 days are the same. This is really, I won't say the word, but you can get the idea. I just don't want to do it. And if that's your story every single day, it makes diabetes extremely difficult to manage. Don't get me wrong, I do have those days with it. But what I try to tell myself is a different story, which is the thrive story, which is essentially every day is a gift. So for me, I know without insulin, I wouldn't be here, I'll be dead. So really, I can make the most of this gift by creating a few simple habits, such as checking my glucose level, taking my insulin before meals, taking on the challenge of fluctuating levels, and I know that I can do it, and actually don't know what my other peers are going through. So that's the story I like to tell myself as often as I possibly can. And I've got this written on my whiteboard in my garage, which basically says, remember, every day is a gift. Without insulin, you'd be dead, live it. And the reason why I wanted to present this at the beginning is because everything that I go through now is suggesting that you do more with your diabetes, that you look at your glucose level more, that you look at your trend arrows more, that you make more proactive decisions to maximize time in range. So if that's not for you, you're probably not in the right session. But if that is for you, then hopefully there's going to be loads of tips, tricks, and things that you can do that's going to help you manage diabetes more effectively and really put you in control. So as a start, there was a new guidance that came out, I want to say beginning of 2020, which says, what should we be aiming for with continuous glucose management? And essentially what we're looking for is trying to get at least 70% time in range, because that's what we know correlates to having good diabetes control, not suffering from lows and highs too much, and also protecting your health in the future. So the aim is trying to get 70% of that time in range without more than 4% less time spent low. So that's what all these strategies that I'm going to go through now are aiming to get people with time in range at 70% or above without glucose levels less than 4, more than 4%. And I know this is possible because we teach, everything that I go through is what we teach at Birmingham Children's Hospital. And the booklet that I will leave you with is our teaching program. And I know that people go from, when they do this program, from 55% in target to 70, 75% in target, if they invest the time and they're willing to do a little bit of trial and error. So this is what it looks like. Essentially, there's different types of strategies. There's strategies for preventing low glucose levels. There's strategies for maximizing time in range, and there's strategies for preventing time above range. And we're going to walk through some of these. I don't have enough time to go through all of them. And that's why I'm going to leave you with the Google Drive so you can explore more on your own. Okay, first of all, you need to know what the trend arrows mean in real terms. So obviously you've got all these trend arrows. These are obviously the Dexcom ones, but translate pretty much to the same if it's a Libra or a Medtronic that you're on. And it's really important to think about what's going to happen, not in the next half an hour, but what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. Where's this glucose level going to be from now with this arrow in the next 10 minutes? So obviously if it's an hour across, pretty simple. It's going to be about the same in the next 10 minutes. If it's an angled arrow up, it's going to be about 1 millimole or 20 milligrams per deciliter higher in the next 10 minutes. If it's an arrow straight up, it's going to be about 1.5 millimoles higher, 30 milligrams per deciliter. If it's a double arrow up, it's going to be 2 millimoles higher or 40 milligrams per deciliter higher. So that's just to give you an idea so you can project in your mind what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. Therefore, what do I need to do to prevent hypos? What do I need to do to prevent highs? Or can I just chill for the next 20-30 minutes because everything is going nice and steady? So it's important you understand what your arrows mean, because that's going to really help you project into the future what's likely to happen. Therefore, what can I do right now to maximize my time in range? So I'm going to pretend you're all nodding, you're going, yes, John, I get this at this point, so I'll crack on. This is just a simple one to say, first of all, let's prevent the lows. So if at any point, and I've got a good point in question here, is that before I was trending a bit down, you won't really be able to see this amazingly, but it now says 5.8 and steady, but you can see it was dropping there before and it had a double arrow down at about 6.4. So I just took some trusty glucose tablets and now it's steadied out. Otherwise I will be panicking. But that only happens if you check your glucose level, look at the arrows, predict what's going to happen and start trialing and erroring with how much glucose you need. Now, I didn't give myself a full hypo treatment, which would have been for me 6 glucose tablets. I only gave 3 because it was not quite there yet. So you can try to experiment with things like this. I was going to show you a quick video of one of the girls who I work with, her actually doing this.
Hello, my name is Caitlin, and this is what I do to prevent my hypo. My bloods are 4.2 and slowly falling, so I'm going to prevent it with 100 ml of Lucozade and drink it, and wait for 20 minutes for it to start working. I have now waited 20 minutes and I have prevented myself from going into hypo. My bloods are now 5.5 and stable.
So that was a massive thank you to Caitlin, but this is what we've got within our program. We've got little video links within our program so you can see real people, real young people with type 1 diabetes using these strategies. So that's the first line of defense, is preventing the time you go low. You're not going to need more than your normal hypo treatment. You'll probably need a little bit less. And this is for you to experiment. Is it 4 glucose tablets? Is it 2 glucose tablets? Is it 1 glucose tablet? So you'll be able to change over time when you try some of these things. So that's one of the strategies for preventing going low. One of the key things people will ask before when we start someone on CGM is, what do I do with that glucose value and trend arrow before bed? Because that's the time when people are most concerned. So we've drawn up a little table, just some simple starting tips. So depending on where your glucose level is, and depending on the arrow, is the suggestion of what to do. So let's just say it was 6.5 and it was going steady. Well, you just go to sleep. There's no need to do anything with that. But if you was 6.5 with an arrow going straight down, you could either do 5 to 10 grams carbs, or if you're on a pump, you could consider a basal rate of 0% for 30 hours, which is just essentially the same as what a Medtronic predictive low glucose suspend would do, or what a basal IQ would do if you were on a T-Slim. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the idea. Once you start to learn these techniques, doing that before bed just essentially means you can get a good night's sleep and not worry about the glucose level going low because you're taking proactive action. So that's what you can do before bed. Okay, managing exercise. This is a challenging one because it depends on what type of exercise you're doing, depends on how long you're doing it for. What we suggest at the Children's is you need to be checking your CGM every 20 minutes and drip feeding in a little bit of glucose to manage it. So this is an example of one chart where if you're between 4 and 6.4, depending on the arrow is depending on the level of glucose that you would have and what that was in terms of dextrose or Lucozade, and therefore that would be good for 20 minutes, and then you would recheck in 20 minutes and do it again. So again, when you have a look at the booklet, you can pop your weight in and it will adjust it for that according to you. So you can get an idea of how much glucose for every 20 minutes will I need to manage this activity. Because no longer gone are the days where you can just have a level of, oh, a level of 8 is fine. But if it's a level with 8 with a double arrow going down and this person's only about 25 kilos, you would need therefore 11 grams of glucose, which is 4 dextrose tablets. So again, thinking about, it's not just the glucose value, it's a trend arrow as well you need to consider when you're thinking about how much glucose you need to put in for 20 minutes worth of exercise. So again, I'm not going to go through that verbatim because you're going to have the opportunity to go and access this booklet, put your weight in and see what it would suggest for you. When it comes to reviewing your control, obviously we've said that in target, time in range, would ideally like to be in the green more than 70%. Amber between 50 and 70%. If it's less than 50%, we really need to get that up. Now, if you're currently got a time in range of 40%, you're not going to go from 40 to 70%. You're going to clip it up in 5% as you try these different things. So don't be alarmed if you think, oh my word, my time in range is only 40%, I'm doing really bad. What it is a case of, well, how can I get it to 45%? Can I think about some strategies to make sure that that improves? And obviously what we don't want is loads of time in range, 80% time in range, but 20% low. You want to keep that less than 4%. And the beauty of having a continuous glucose monitor or even a Libra is you can check often. And obviously with a continuous glucose monitor, have alarms to prevent that time below 4. So these are just put here so you can think about, well, am I in the red, amber or green? How do I move up to the next level by trying just a few things? Take it 5% at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, so you don't need to go from 40 to 70%. You clip it off in 5% as you go. Here are some tips and tricks that are in the booklet, things that we teach. So this is just a table. It looks messy, but I'm going to explain it in that, first of all, you need to know what your sensitivity factor is. How much 1 unit of insulin drops your glucose level by. So in this example, 1 unit drops this person by 3. So if this is milligrams per deciliter, that's about 60 milligrams per deciliter. 1 unit drops you 60 milligrams per deciliter. So you would do is go, what's your sensitivity factor? Go down here. 1 drops me by 3. Then at a meal time, if I had an arrow trending slightly up or slightly down, I would either add on or take off half a unit. If it was a straight arrow up or down, I would add on or take off 1 unit. If it was a double arrow, I would add on or take off 1.5 units. That's because you know where the glucose level is going. You know you should need a little bit more or a little bit less insulin at the mealtime. So obviously, depending where your sensitivity factor lies, if you've got a very strong sensitivity factor of 1 unit drops you by 1.5, then the adjustments are bigger. 1 unit, 2 units, 2.5. And to put that into reality, when you type into the booklet what your sensitivity factor is, it will generate you a simple table you can take a picture of that will say, at a mealtime, depending on what your arrow is, you would add on or take off a certain amount of insulin. So in this case, someone is 1 unit drops you by 3. The 5 unit insulin dose was the meal dose. If you had a double arrow down, you'd take 1.5 units off, go to 3.5. If it was steady, you would give the 5. If it was just a straight arrow down, you would only take off the 1 unit. So again, these small adjustments at meal times can prevent issues in the next 2 to 3 hours if you're willing to make those adjustments. So there's some ideas of how you can adjust insulin dose. My personal favorite is this one. So it's look at at a meal time, always check your CGM and trend arrow half an hour, at least half an hour before you eat, because that will help you to determine when should I give my insulin before eating. So the standard advice is 15 to 20 minutes before. But if your glucose level is quite a bit higher and trending up, you definitely want to give it more than 15, 20 minutes before. You want to give it more like half an hour before. So within the booklet, there is, depending on what your glucose level is, depending on the trend arrow, how many minutes before. And I'm going to leave this to Yusuf to show you how he uses it.
Hello everyone, my name is Yusuf and today I'll be telling you how I use dynamic CGM to help me with decisions. So right now, my Dexcom is 12.7, slowly falling. And now, on the chart, I'm in between 10 and 14 millimoles, and I am slowly falling. And it says 25 minutes before I start eating. So I'm going to give myself insulin and then wait 25 minutes before I start eating my lunch. Hello everybody, I'm back from lunch. It has been an hour and 15 minutes since I had my lunch, and as you can see, my Dexcom says that I'm 8.5 stable. But if you feel like you're going to go above range, you can go outside and do some exercise if you want to. Bye.
So that's Yusuf there demonstrating the use of giving your insulin depending on your glucose level and your trend arrow before meals. And again, these won't work perfectly for you, but they're just a guide to consider how to adjust the doses as you move on. So again, you don't have to do these things, but if you get into a simple habit of checking the glucose value and trendo half an hour before you eat, you can then adapt your time. And obviously, if you're dropping and you're 5.5 with an angled arrow down, you'd want to prevent the hypo first before actually, a few glucose tablets in before you give your insulin dose. Because if you give your insulin dose too early and then you go low and you've got a load of food sat in your belly, and you're struggling to get the glucose tablets on top, it can be challenging. So there's just some ideas based around insulin timings. Another insulin one to consider is this is how insulin works in terms of when either you inject it or you give it via a pump. It goes not into the blood, but it goes into the subcutaneous part. So below the skin, not quite to the blood, there's a place called the interstitial space. And essentially, if you put a big blob of insulin in, let's say 20 units here, you can see there's not much surface area for the insulin to get absorbed. So a lot of it sits in the middle and takes a while to get absorbed. But if that 10, 20 units are split into two 10-unit injections, there are two separate blobs with a lot more surface area, therefore the insulin gets absorbed. So we suggest for our patients who are on injections, when the dose gets above 20, to split the quick-acting dose into 2 injections, if they're willing to do 2 injections. If they're not willing to do injections, no problem. But if they want to do that, it's a way that they can do that to speed up the insulin. Now, if you're on a pump, what you could consider is making sure you give that 20 units over a sort of 10 or 15 minute extended bolus, so it goes in slower, so there's more surface area and you don't get such a blob of insulin. So again, these are things that are sort of tips and tricks to get the extra 5% time in range. You don't have to do these. They're just a variety, a buffet of different options that you could consider. Something that I'm very passionate about and I think is underused, I think exercise is one of the most effective tools in managing diabetes and glucose levels and getting the most amount of time in range. And the reason being is when you give insulin, how quickly it works in dragging glucose out of the blood into your cells is all based around how much blood flow there is to your muscles. So if you're sat down on your ass after eating, you can see the blood flow to your muscles is very slow. Therefore, the insulin delivery to your muscles is very slow. Therefore, the glucose uptake by your muscles is also very slow. So if you just eaten breakfast now and you're sat here watching this and you haven't done 10 minutes of activity after your insulin dose, I bet you're on the rise, especially if it's a fairly high carb breakfast cereal. Whereas if you would have had your insulin and you would have done 10 minutes of activity, a little bit like I did to get my glucose level coming down, then you would find that you spend very limited time above 10 because the blood flow, when you do activity and movement, make sure that the blood goes into your muscles rather than to your belly to absorb the food, makes the insulin work faster and pulls the glucose out of your bloodstream. So one thing that we really suggest where I work is after eating, it's 5 to 10 minutes of activity. And I don't mean running around, I mean literally going for a walk. And this is why young people who walk to school have better post-breakfast glucose levels than people who get the car to school, because that 10 to 15 minutes of walking speeds the insulin action up and keeps that post-meal glucose level down. So if you take nothing from this, I would really suggest you start putting into your routine 10 minutes of activity after each meal. And for me, that looks like it might be 10 minutes of baby Zumba with my daughter Grace. It might be a 10-minute walk. After tea, I've got a rowing machine. It might just be 10 minutes on there. Those are the lengths I'm personally prepared to go to keep the post-meal glucose levels down. You don't have to go to those levels, but you can consider those as an option. This is definitely one of my favorite things to do, and anyone who knows me, who I work with, will see me doing this fairly often. Okay, so consider the situation. As happens with diabetes a lot, yes, we would love to give our insulin 15-20 minutes before eating every meal, but the reality of life is it doesn't work like that. Especially at work, someone brings in a nice cake and I go, do you know what? It looks so good. I ain't waiting. I'm going to eat that. It's 30 grams of carbs. I'll put the 30 grams in, but no, I've got a problem because the food is working quicker than the insulin. I can't give more insulin, otherwise I'm going to go a lot lower later on. So my only option is to get moving for 15 minutes to make sure that insulin I've given gets working a lot quicker. So I'm just going to give you a little video of me doing this.
This is how to use short bouts of activity to speed up the action of insulin, and this works really well if you have given your insulin just before you eat rather than maybe 15, 20 or 30 minutes before you eat. Often what happens is the glucose level goes above 10 and you can't give a correction because that'll be too much insulin. It's just the fact that the insulin's not working quick enough. So if you do a nice short bout of activity, it will increase the blood flow to the muscles, increase how quickly the insulin works, and drag the glucose level down faster and without requiring extra insulin. So you can see quite clearly here if it's between 8 and 10, and depending on the rise, how long you should do the activity for. Between 10 and 14, the length of time goes up, and above 14, it goes higher. Now this example I'm just going to give is something that I use very frequently when my glucose level sort of is aiming to go above 10 because I haven't given my insulin far enough in advance. Then I will use short bouts of activity, and this is the real life example. So this is a real life example of using exercise to bring down your glucose level. So my glucose level here is 9.4 with an arrow across, and the reason for that is genuinely because I gave my insulin and didn't wait my 20 minutes. So I could give another correction and wait 2 to 3 hours for it to come down, or I could use 5 to 10 minutes of exercise to make that insulin work quicker to bring it down. So my preferred method is doing high knees because you don't require any space for this. And so I'm going to do 5 minutes of high knees now and show you how it brings it down. So here we go, 5 minutes of high knees. Okay, so we're now 20 minutes or 15 minutes on from the exercise. You can see now the glucose level has dropped to 7.8 with an arrow down, and you can see what would have probably been a 2-hour high above 10 has now been 10 has been avoided, and I'm now trending back down nicely. So that's just an option. It's not something you have to do, but if you know you're giving the right amount of insulin, you're just giving it too late, not close enough to your food, the only way to make that insulin work quicker is to do activity, because what activity does is it spreads the insulin around to the muscles and gets it taken up quicker. That way the insulin works quicker and pulls that glucose out of your blood. Not something you have to do, but it's something that if you don't like running glucose levels that go high for 2 to 3 hours because you've given insulin at the wrong time or too late, it's a good opportunity to use exercise and CGM to see the effect of it.
Okay, that's enough from that, but that gives you an idea. I want to show you things that work in real life, not just talking about theory, hence clipping you the videos, and all those videos are within the booklet you can get access to. So within that Google Drive, there's really just the sort of the top tactics to prevent after meal spikes. And I think Gary Shiner will be talking about loads of different options as well. There are insulin tactics, making sure the insulin goes in before. One real thing to consider is if you're using injections, make sure your quick acting insulin goes into either the back of your arm or into your belly, not into your leg. The reason being is the blood flow to your belly and your arm is a lot faster. Therefore, you can see how quickly insulin works is a lot faster in the abdomen and the upper arm. So if you're on injections, get your insulin injections for your meals in your belly or your arm and keep your long acting to your legs. If you're on an insulin pump, try to avoid swapping between your leg and your belly, because the days where you put it on your leg, the insulin absorption will be much slower at meal times. You'll get more wicked post-meal spikes. The days where you put it on your belly, it will work better. So you want consistency with trying to keep it on your belly if possible. And the bottom one is just to show, make sure you check for lumps. Don't be injecting into lumps because the insulin doesn't work as well into lumps. The activity stuff we've been through, and if you're going to watch the webinar that we do for the Ultimate Guide to Insulin Dosing, we'll be talking a lot about trying to keep to 3 well-balanced meals where insulin and food absorption work very well, and try to avoid high GI meals with loads of snacks, and that's what you get. So I'll save that for that particular talk, but this is just to give you a nice little summary and overview that you can access afterwards also. What we did in our research when we looked at the young people, the people did actually using these strategies work or not. We developed a 7-question questionnaire with a score of 0 to 28, 4 points for each question, depending on how proactive you are. The higher the score, the more proactive you are. And you can take that if you want to, when you click through onto the Google Drive. But essentially what we found is the higher the dynamic glucose management score, the more proactive you are, the greater the time in range. So people who got a 70% time in range generally were scoring at least 18, 19, 20 on how proactive they were. So this is just to show these things work in real life from a research point of view. So here is, again, as I promised, what is available on that Google Drive. So I'll also drop this link in a second into the chat. So if you can't get a QR code, you'll be able to get it from the chat. Within there, you'll see, in fact, I'll show you, there are several things. On the Google Drive, you've got the CGM dynamic glucose management. If you click into there, you've got the workbook, you've got the infographics, you've got a little bit of information there. For the insulin dosing guides, when we go through that, there's all the stuff for the insulin dosing guides there. So if you don't get to that, you can also check that out. And there are some sample meal plans. When I used to work for a company that did thinking about meal plans for people with type 1 for sort of balanced meals, there are sort of some different options within there. So hopefully there's a little bit of something in there for everybody. What I will do is stop sharing my screen and then open it up for Chris to come in with maybe sort of 10 minutes or so of questions.
Brilliant, thanks, John. That's absolutely fantastic. We've had a lot of kind of feedback on the chat. A lot of people missing out on the QR code and wanting to make sure they can get hold of that to access. So thank you for saying that you stick a link in the chat. Just to tell everybody.
So if you look in the chat now, it's there. So
brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. And just also everybody, I know there's a lot of people wishing that their sons or daughters or partners were hearing this as well. So we'll let everybody know about how to make the video recordings available. And there'll be emails going out at the end of the conference about that. So so we've got questions in the kind of we've got some questions about it's a number of exercise related questions.
Yeah.
And we've got a number of questions about people on particular types of therapy and can they use some of the techniques that you've talked about. So let's start off with maybe a few of those. So somebody daughter newly diagnosed and has gone straight onto Fiasp, the new fast acting insulin.
Yeah.
And she was wondering whether these things about pre-bolusing for meals, can that still apply on Fiasp, or do they need to do something different? They've been advised to eat straight away by the sounds of things.
Okay, so the research is pretty clear. There was a meta-analysis by a chap called Slattery in 2018 from King's College London, and they looked at the difference between Novorapid and Fiasp, and basically all the research shows you still need to get it in 15 minutes before. So the only difference with a Fiasp is it's got a molecule of niacin on it, which basically makes the blood flow to where you've done the injection come faster. But still, even though it's faster, unfortunately, it's not that fast. So like the marketing people go like, oh, we've got this new fast acting insulin. It's amazing. You only need to give it when you eat. The research is pretty clear. You still need to give it 15 minutes before, and you can still use those strategies 20 minutes before. We personally don't have any children at the moment with Fiasp because within our area, it's limited. I use Fiasp and do it, and a lot of adults who I do some work with also do it. So obviously, disclaimer, check with your healthcare professional before doing anything. But if they say, oh, no, you need to give it with your meal, point them in the direction of a paper by Slattery 2018, King's College London, a review on pre-meal bolusing, and it shows you quite clearly there, regardless of whether these new fast-acting ones and Lilly are going to bring out a new one called, I think, Bioperine, that's still the same. Still needs to go in 15 minutes before, because unfortunately, when you eat food, it's in there straight away. Insulin takes at least 10, 15, 20 minutes to warm up to get in there. So yeah, it's still,
Okay.
that answers the question.
Great. So it's clear from the chat we've got some people on pumps and some people on injections. So a pump related question first. For people who are using some of the newer pumps which themselves are linked into CGMs,
yeah,
a number of people asking whether the arrows are taken account of in the bolus calculators in those newer pumps.
Yeah, so if you're talking about either the 670G, the T-Slim with Control IQ, potentially the 780G, and then there'll be the Horizon coming with the Omnipod, I would say some of these strategies will be much more difficult to do, because what you'll have is an algorithm within those closed loop systems, and the same if you had a Beta Bionics, for example, in the future, is they're taking into account the trend arrows and either giving more insulin or less insulin. If you're dropping, they're suspending the basal insulin. If it's going to be a Beta Bionics, it's going to be more glucagon going in. So probably you would have to, they're not going to be as useful if you're on a 780 or a hybrid closed loop. What I would say is definitely the case is your activity, i.e. 10 minutes after eating, activity 10 minutes after eating, and potentially if you're going high straight away after eating because you still haven't waited your 15 minutes, which you still need to do on the closed loops, doing some activity at that point will actually be beneficial because it will speed up the activity of the way the insulin's going in. But I wouldn't be changing insulin doses at meal times if I was on a sort of closed loop system, because like you said, that is factored within.
Okay, cool. On to a few questions about exercise. So a couple of people asking about using temporary basals, and I think when you were focused on carbs before, to deal with arrows down. What about using temporary basals instead?
Yeah, it's such a complicated, it's one of my passions, and maybe next year we'll do a one on exercise. I know Gary Shiner's doing something on exercise this time, so I would say first of all go and watch that, because that will give you some tips and tricks. There is a new consensus guideline from the EASD and ISPAD, which has just come out in October, which basically synthesizes everything you would need to do before eating, during and after for people who are on pumps, MDI, and also with CGM. And it's far too complicated for me to explain in 2 minutes, but to say there are a range of strategies you can do. If it's aerobic exercise or maybe mixed like football, you probably want to be lowering the insulin before and also lowering the insulin afterwards. But still, the reason why that chart within the booklet will still be useful, because if you've put in place the strategies that you think are going to work by doing a temporary basal or a bolus reduction, but you get to the start of exercise or during exercise and you've got a level of 5.5 with arrows going down, you're going to need carbs because you haven't quite got the insulin reductions right. So even though no matter whatever strategy you use, that table will still be useful, because with the best will in the world, the change in insulin dose strategies that we try don't always work. Having that backup of what to do during the activity based on glucose levels and trend arrows will help. There is something within that resource link that I put through, but it is for healthcare professionals only, which is a calculator. So if you thought that was going to be useful for you, you would have to send that on to your healthcare professional for them to learn how to use it. I would love, as a person with type 1 diabetes, to give it to you directly, but because it's decision support, if you followed something like that and something happened to you, and it's not given to you by your own healthcare professional, not that I don't want to take the responsibility for that, but I don't know you as a person. I don't know your hypoglycemia risk. I don't know your exercise risk, etc. That needs to be done in conjunction with your healthcare professional. So there is something within there, but you would have to pass that on to your healthcare professional so they could learn how to use it.
Okay. What about the situation where we know sometime after a meal there's a lot of exercise going to happen? So there's an example in the Q&A of someone, I think in the Scouts or the Cubs, who's about to go on a hike. I guess there's other people who know that football practice happens at a certain time every Thursday afternoon or whatever. So if you know that after tea time there's going to be a lot of exercise, what about What adjustments should people be making then?
Thank you. Really simple for you. I'm going to give you 2 rules. The first rule is a 90-minute rule. If you're going to be eating and giving a meal bolus within 90 minutes of exercise, most types of exercise, you're going to need to reduce that meal bolus. As a starting point, reduce by 50% and then see what happens. So that's only if the exercise within 90 minutes. The second rule is, if you're not going to be eating within 90 minutes, try your level best to make sure it's 3 hours, 180 minutes, the 3-hour rule, at least 3 hours since you've last eaten given insulin. The reason being is the insulin for that meal that you've given will have virtually finished by the time you do the exercise, which means you'll have not too much insulin knocking about and your glucose levels will be very predictable and not too volatile during exercise. So try and, if you're doing exercise in 90 minutes, reduce the bolus by 50%. If you possibly can, wait 180 minutes until you give a meal and insulin. Therefore, your glucose ride during exercise will be much more stable.
Cool, thank you. And then last one on exercise, someone asking, I think a really good question, with all these carbs going in to manage exercise, can people with type 1 get the benefits of exercise, whether that be weight loss or fitness improvement?
100%. So the best way to think about this, even if you swallow 10 glucose tablets during exercise, that's 30 grams of carbs, that's only 120 calories. You think of that in a day of 2,500 calorie intake, you just need to chop your meals down a little bit. So if you're using pure glucose like that, 100 calories is nothing. You just need to take it off the rest of the day because you're going to need that glucose to actually manage to complete the exercise, which is going to give you not just weight loss benefits, but actual physical benefits as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and get 2 or 3 questions in before we close.
My daughter and my son are going to have to join me for the last couple of minutes, and my wife's got to go out. But yeah, they're going to help. They're going to help me. Sorry. Okay, go for it.
Great. A really good question about what's going on at the moment. So with school routines being upset with people, the way that schools are managing back in the light of coronavirus, a lot of people's routine are just up in the air. When they were doing PE or games, or how they're getting to school has changed, times of day has changed. Any tips on how to manage at the moment given all the sort of lack of routine?
It's very difficult. I guess it's the same for me as well personally. The best bit of advice I could do is diabetes loves consistency, and especially consistency in your baseline level of activity. So something you can do is have a step tracker. So I know for me, I need to hit 13,000 steps a day. That way then, that'll keep my baseline insulin sensitivity pretty decent. If I go through days of 2,000 steps, my insulin requirements are going to go through the roof. And if I go to days of 20,000 steps, it's going to be really sensitive. So a simple way is get a simple tracker and make sure that the baseline level of activity is consistent from day to day and also on the weekends. So the people who suffer the most from changes in week to weekend glucose levels are the ones who either do a lot of activity during school days and then become weekend computer warriors, or the other way around, they do so much activity on the weekend and nothing during the week, they need maybe different basal profiles. So my advice would be try and keep that step level consistent on a daily basis. It will keep your insulin sensitivity very similar.
Great. Okay. Last question. I've saved up the cricket question till last, but I think it's also a question about uncertainty and not knowing what's going to happen next. So, someone's 17-year-old son struggles with the cricket because they don't know before whether the team's going to be batting or bowling first, so they don't know what kind of carbs, temp basal to use. And any tips for you, but also more generally, I suppose, this question about how you deal with uncertainty about what actually is going to happen in the next hour or 2.
The best bit of advice, this is what I do personally, is I make sure I get a big meal in 3 hours before we start. So I personally start cricket about 1 o'clock. So at 10 o'clock, I'll have my big meal, get the insulin and get the carbs done, and therefore I'm full. Therefore, my circulating insulin levels are fairly lowish when I actually get to start. So that way, it's easier just to make small adjustments with carbs and from there. If you're eating, the hard bit, if you're playing a full game of cricket, is at half time, is I personally go for a low carb option at half time. Therefore, I don't have to put large amounts of bolus insulin in. Therefore, I'm not going to have uncertainty as we go through. So that's probably the easiest way. And the other bit is if you're wearing a pump during cricket, is wear a pair of jocks that's got a pocket at the front, so you can wear your pump and keep it on when you're batting, and also maybe try and keep it inside your box to protect it as well. That's my personal tip.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you ever so much, John, and your two helpers at the end there. That was really really great. And everybody, thank you so much for your participation in the chat, in the Q&A. These sessions will be made available afterwards. I hope you enjoy really the rest of the conference. But John, been absolutely fantastic to have your first-hand tips and such thorough knowledge, and we're getting great feedback from everybody. So enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody, and we'll see you at one of the sessions soon. Cheers.